I've been waiting for this one, Rob, because I'm fascinated with the KC Underground, and probably a lot of us are, because we're looking at this going like KC Underground, Tampa Underground, disciple making movements. How do we apply some of these lessons of multiplication to whatever context we're in? Because I don't think anyone here would say, you know what, I don't want any more leaders. I don't want any more church planters. We don't want more multiplication. We would all be like, yeah, how do you get that? So can't wait to kind of mine that from you.
It's really good to be with you all today. I absolutely love networks. Friends on mission. We're one big extended spiritual family. We've got the same Father, the same Lord and Savior, same Spirit, same baptism. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
And if we're going to see the beauty and justice and good news of Jesus fill a city, it's going to happen through the Big C Church living into that John 17 reality. And you guys are actually doing that work. And it's tough work, and it's still the exception rather than the norm. So way to be a signpost for the kingdom is God's people. So just a bit of what we're up to. We're weird. You guys like weird things? Kansas City Underground, we're kind of weird. We're not a church plant. We're actually a mission agency that exists to launch networks. So we're organized in kind of a peculiar way. Our mission is to fill Kansas City with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus. So that rests in Ephesians chapter 1 with the original design, that the body, we are the fullness of him who fills everything every way. So when Jesus came out of the empty tomb, there was a new humanity and a new creation. And eventually Jesus, when he returns, evil will be vanquished, no more death, sickness, or sorrow. And all that Jesus is will finally fill everything every way. And that is our great and sure hope. But we're not treading water until then, right? Let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. His resurrection is first fruits. So Jesus will fill everything every way, and we are the fullness of him. We carry that fullness. And so that means it's our job as the church to fill our city with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus. So we think about Kansas City, and we want to see every single man, woman, boy, and girl in our city to have, we want them to have repeated opportunities to be able to see, hear, experience, and respond to the gospel. And it's called gospel saturation. So we exist for gospel saturation in our city. And our strategy or our vision for that is a missionary in every street and a micro church in every network of relationships. And so we're trying to design everything with that end in mind, because we feel like that vision is kind of an original design. Now, we don't think we're going to do that alone. That's why we're about networks. Come on. And we want to exist underground. We're here to serve every form of the church in our city. If they're interested in how to help ordinary people become disciple makers, missionary formation, simple expressions of church, we're here to serve. So our mission agency exists to help ordinary people become missionary disciple makers. We have what we call 4 organizing identities. I'm going to pull up a little graphic, and can you all see that? Excellent. And these are all available. You guys can have this afterwards. So I'm not throwing shade on anyone in this next statement. I'm just naming kind of what has been. I've led in kind of the prevailing model of church most of my life, been a pastor, helped join a church plant in Granger, Indiana, shadow of the Golden Dome. And by God's grace, that became a church that reached a lot of people in our town and helped them meet Jesus and experience transformation. And then I joined the staff of a large church here in Kansas City and worked there for 4 years. And the underground is about 2 years old. So we are for every expression of the church, God's Spirit, and lives and empowers all forms of the church. But in the prevailing model of church, when people are invited into kind of relationship with the organized church, it typically looks something like, hey, we want you to attend, and then we hope that you'll invite people, and then we hope that you'll volunteer. We hope you'll become a member of maybe a small group or the church itself. We want you to give, and especially give. Be a tither. Just having fun with you. All right. And those are all meaningful activities, but we also know it's possible to attend, invite, volunteer, be a member, and give, and never become a disciple maker. And so we try to create a set of organizing identities in the underground, where it would get back to sort of a more primal understanding of what it means to be the church. So our first organizing identity is that of a missionary. So in the Kansas City Underground, a missionary is an ordinary person who plants themselves among an unreached pocket of people to plant the gospel and make new disciples. So our mission agency exists to equip ordinary folks to do just that. And as they partner with Jesus in their context, where they live, work, learn, or play, plant themselves, plant the gospel. If you live like a good missionary, you'll get to have spiritual conversations, and then Jesus would draw people to himself when you plant the gospel. And then suddenly you have this 2 or 3 or this little group of new disciples. That's what we call a microchurch. A microchurch is an extended spiritual family. It's led by ordinary people. The goal is to live in everyday gospel community and to own the mission of Jesus in a network of relationships. And so our minimal ecclesiology is it's a community of people around the Lord Jesus that embrace the purposes of community, worship, and mission. Community, we're actually going to be a family. We're going to live into the one another's. Worship, Romans 12. We're going to give our entire lives back to Jesus. We're going to move from unbelief to belief in Jesus in every area of life. And then mission, we're going to make disciples. It's a co-mission. We join Jesus in making disciples who make disciples and making the kingdom tangible. And so our missionaries are ordinary folks, and we equip them. We have 7 equipping teams that provide kind of a platform, like Chivo was saying. We're kind of a platform for missionaries who plant themselves, plant the gospel. And then when microchurches emerge, we support those microchurches. We help them multiply and flourish. And as they do, we form networks of microchurches and missionaries. Come on. And we call those collectives. And typically anywhere from 4 to 8 microchurches, and you'll have a bunch of missionaries in there. It's usually either hyper local. So in about a 3 or 4 mile radius of where I live, we have 7 microchurches now, because we're starting to fill West Shawnee with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus. And it started with a couple missionaries in one neighborhood, me and my wife. But the Lord is multiplying missionaries and disciples and microchurches. It's pretty amazing. And we have 7 networks like that around the city. So some of them are very hyper local, geographic. Some of them are affinity groups. One of our missionaries felt called to the jail system, went in as a volunteer, started a discovery Bible study with a person of peace. In about 3 months, there were discovery Bible studies in every single pod in the jail. Like, woo! And guys were meeting Jesus literally almost every day. It's now spread to 3 different jail systems. It's a network of 8 or 9 microchurches now in the city. And it's just a beautiful move of God's Spirit. That network, that collective is called Share the Hope. So some of them have a geographic title like West Shawnee Collective. Some of them would be Share the Hope because it's an affinity group. And then you can see the last identity is a hub. And the hub is actually the mission agency. And for us, what a hub is it's an equipping team, an apostolic equipping team that has a shared space, and they equip and fuel and support the movement of missionaries and microchurches in their region of the city. So if we're going to fill Kansas City with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus, we have to train about 42,000 missionaries. And we're going to need about 21 or 22,000 microchurches. So we're trying to design with that end in mind. So what you see here is a very simple fractal structure that is bivocational. It can be easily reproduced and scaled out. It's got a pretty beautiful span of care that nurtures true discipleship. And our hubs, for example, we're currently up to 3 hubs in our city. So what that means is we have 3 sets of equipping teams. They're like Navy SEAL equipping teams around the city. We think we're going to probably need 25 of those teams around the city, and they're equipping the missionaries and the microchurches in that city. Think of it kind of like Paul goes to Ephesus, and he's got his gang of 8. And these are all workers that he's been developing. And then there's also Priscilla and Aquila, and then Timothy. So he's got a team of about 10 people, and he rents that hall, and it's a shared space. And Paul says the gospel went all over Asia Minor because of what happened in Ephesus. And some of the churches, for example, in the book of Revelation, actually came out of the equipping that happened there at the hall. That's what a hub space is. It can be inside of a prevailing model church. So we're actually training a couple of churches right now on how to kind of start a hub within their pre-existing structures. But most of the hubs that we're launching are outside of the religious structures of the kind of organized church. Like we rent a space, 1,500 square foot space. That's our shared space. And it's a co-working space for the missionaries and the microchurches. And so our goal is basically to multiply at 5 points, right? We want to multiply disciples. We want to multiply leaders, which are really missionaries. A missionary is a disciple maker. So if to be a leader in the underground, you actually have to make disciples. That's how you become a leader. So we want to multiply disciples, leaders, what we call houses. So a house is actually that micro expression of the church. I'm going to show this to you. And again, for us, you look at the New Testament and you see, kind of 2 dynamics of the church in Jerusalem. They gathered in the temple courts, and then there was the household expression. And that was, the oikos, which was the primary Greco-Roman social structure, which was typically built around vocation. Like we're the Masons, and it's this community of about 20 to 50 people, blood relations, household slaves, vocational connections. We're the Masons. What you see happening in the book of Acts, it's like the jailer and his household, boom, gospel hits. And that oikos is turned into a microchurch. Lydia and her household, Crispus and his household, right? And in Jerusalem, they had both of these dynamics of these new households of faith gathering in the temple courts. But when the temple court gathering goes away because of persecution, the church just keeps going fine because they had that most primal expression. And that's what was being reproduced. You go to Romans and you kind of jump to the end there, and Paul's greeting all the leaders and the workers. And James Dunn says, basically, you have 5 microchurches there. And as far as we know, they never met all together. So the Church of Rome is actually a network of those microchurches. So we're trying to get back to that sort of organic structure because we think that multiplies, because all this can be led by ordinary people. And it's happening in first and second and third spaces. And the church has kind of got into like, we're going to create a 4th space, and it's kind of expensive. And it requires a very particular type of leader to lead it. And we still need that 4th space, like that prevailing model of planting. We need that in Kansas City. So we actually have money in our budget, and we're part of New Thing, and we are helping that go in our city. But our thing is we need this other restoration of what was kind of the simpler fractal expression of the church that can multiply easier, which in the majority world, in places like India and China, y'all know is prevailing. It's like the greatest movements in the history of the church are happening in our time. And we're saying it can be done here in the West. So we multiply disciples, leaders, and when we say houses, that's what we're talking about. We're not saying house church. It's like households of faith, new micro churches, and then networks and hubs. And those hubs, again, don't think about it so much as like a space. Think about it as an apostolic equipping team, like the apostles in Solomon's colonnade, or Paul and his gang at the hall in Ephesus, in networks. So this is how we're structuring so that we can scale out and fill the city. And again, we're not going to do that alone. We're doing that with the church and all of its expressions and forms. And I'm going to show you one last thing. And then I'm going to do this literally in 2 minutes. But this is our training pathway for our missionaries. It's called the missionary pathway. And it's 5 phases that any missionary or movement goes through on the way towards multiplication. This is based off of the life of Jesus, the life of the early church, and then the work of guys like David Garrison, David Watson that have been studying disciple making movements for like 4 decades. And it's 5 phases. Phase 1 is extraordinary prayer and fasting. This is where it's like the early church. You can't skip the upper room. It's like Jesus in the wilderness. You don't get to skip the wilderness. Like, we can only go forward as fast as we can on our knees. In this phase, we're teaching people simple prayer skills, like listening prayer. Number 1 skill of any missionary is how to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit and then respond in obedience. How do we quiet all the mind chatter to actually hear the voice of God through the scriptures? And then missional prayer. How do we pray for and with people? And do it the way Jesus did it, authoritatively. And then how do we fast? And how do we return to our true identity in Christ? That's kind of the ethos of extraordinary prayer and fasting. And you're starting to build a team, because when Jesus sent them, nobody went alone. And then you can see one of our equipping teams is personal calling and discovery. So we help missionaries. One of the equipping experiences, we can help you discover, get clarity on your calling. Who are you sent to? What are your gifts? Who else do you need on your team? How is it with your soul? And then live as a missionary. So we teach people 5 missionary rhythms: begin in prayer, listen and engage, eat, serve, and story. We teach them to find people of peace and go into those relational networks. And then we get it. And in this phase, we're helping you get really focused. You can't be a good missionary in 6 different contexts. You have to have a primary, and then you can have a secondary. And if those overlap, like my primary is my neighborhood. My secondary is actually my pub, which is about 1.5 miles away. They overlap, so there's synergy between them. We help people get real clarity on that. And then you can see we have startup coaching. And we have like a 7-week huddle, for example, that you guys, if you go to themissionarypathway.com, it's available for free. You can use it. You can go through it yourself. It's designed, though, for a team of people to go through. It helps missionaries kind of get kickstarted into phase 1, 2, and 3. And then we have a longer kind of slow burn coaching where missionaries get connected to a successful practitioner. And then we teach you how to plant the gospel. We do that primarily through Discovery Bible Study. And then we use all the tools that Tim Chester or Jeff Vanderstelt have kind of built out with gospel fluency. 4 Gs, fruit to root, meta-narrative of the gospel, creation, fall, redemption, restoration with Jesus in the middle. And then ongoing coaching. So if you start planting the gospel and you're making new disciples, what's going to happen is a microchurch is going to emerge. And now you're going to go to ongoing coaching, and that equipping team is provided for microchurch leaders. So now how do we help your microchurch family flourish? We teach them sustainable rhythms for a microchurch, and then how to plan for multiplication. So multiplying new leaders or disciple makers or missionaries, new groups, usually Discovery Bible Studies, new teams, new missional teams. And then some of our equipping teams are there in the middle. So we have a financial services team, a media team, children and family, and worship. So that's kind of the, 10,000 foot flyover of the underground, how we're organizing for multiplication and how we're training for multiplication. And so I'll just kind of pause there. And I think, Gabe, you want to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, Rob, gosh, I mean, my brain is exploding and I can't write fast enough as you're sharing that stuff. I'm sure we all feel similarly. And you and I've talked a couple times about this stuff. And the last time we talked, I was like, what is the matter with me? Why are we not doing more of this stuff in our church? So we started trying to find ways we could implement some of these things. Bless was one of them. Kind of just back to a simple thing like worship, community, mission. And so we've actually rebuilt our pathway around that.
Beautiful, man. That's great progress.
Well, thank you. And it feels like we're 1 million miles from where, like we want to be, but I guess just to plant the seed of question, how significant is it in the architecture and in what you see, the fruit you see later, that you are identifying somebody by the title missionary? And because, right, if you think missionary, in my context, it's like, oh yeah, those people we send those checks to, but can you talk that through? And then any other questions, please feel free to
just
jump
so
in.
y'all know, that title, for example, one of the hubs is emerging in the urban core, and the word missionary doesn't work there. It's got too much baggage. So mission agent or mission activist or mission catalyst. We have basically, we have actual commitments. We have like a missionary commitment or a mission activist commitment. It's got 11 commitments, within it. And then when you make new disciples and a microchurch emerges, we have a microchurch leader commitment. And then we have a hub leader. So it's kind of like the leaders of a hub commit. And then actually we're developing a new one. It's called missional teams, which is kind of between missionary and microchurch, where you've got 4 or 5 people that are like, man, we have organized as a team and we're going after the rodeo community in Kansas. All right. Love it. But it's not a microchurch yet because they haven't made new disciples and seen new extended spiritual families emerge. So what we're trying to do with missionary or mission agent is basically get back to the Missio Dei. It's like the Father sent the Son, the Father and the Son sent the Spirit, and the Father and the Son and the Spirit have sent us. Mission is not extrinsic from God. It's intrinsic. I always think about it like his heartbeat. So when Jesus is reading the scroll of Isaiah, he's not like, here's my mission statement. No, his heart is just a sight for the blind, freedom for the captive. It's just, and like the Father's heart that none should perish. It's who our God is. And so if our God's a missionary God who left his throne to come and live among us in obscurity for 30 years, think about that. Most of mission is mundane and anonymous. And then, he reaches the apex of his ministry, and what does it look like? Whoa, look, he's washing my feet. Oh, look, he's on a cross. So we're trying to say to people, mission isn't about activity. So our micro churches, they're not like, we're not organizing people on the back end of any weekend service or anything. We're not like organizing Christians into groups. We're like sending people at least with a pair or a team, and they're actually making new disciples in a new context. So it really is a pure missionary endeavor. So we have a bunch of catchphrases, that we use all the time to help people get this kind of stuff. Like church is not an activity, it's an identity. You can't go to something you are. We'll say like, you don't have to cross a jungle to be a missionary. You just have to cross the street, like just simple things that help people wrap their minds around. You can be on mission. You don't have to leave your zip code, right? Like you can be on mission where you live, work, learn, and play. And then we do deconstruct, like we put so much energy into teaching the bless rhythms that it deconstructs that bad proselytization, colonialization, attitude and expression. Because for us, it's like, man, you begin in prayer. Start by listening, not talking. Learn how to ask good questions. Learn what to listen and what to listen for. Where's the pain in your neighborhood? Go learn about it. Where's the power in your neighborhood? Go learn about it. Where's the pennies in your neighborhood? Go learn about it. Where are the people of peace? Where are the parties? We have these little things. We have like the P's, and then we have the 4 H's. Like when you're listening to your neighbor, like learn about like, what are their heart passions? What are their hopes? What are their habits and what are their hurts? And we teach missionaries simple, open-ended questions. Like just start getting to know people, listen, and then engage, based off of where they're at, not where you want them to be, And then hospitality, like eating. Start opening up your front porch, your back porch, your garage, your table. Jesus did most of his ministry at meals. So really being a missionary is about activating a table that you already have. And it's at the table that a stranger becomes an acquaintance becomes a friend, and then a friend through the gospel becomes family. And so we teach a lot about hospitality, opening your life. And that doesn't mean entertaining. Like hospitality is you come as you are into my life as I am. So, hey, look, there's a big pile of dirty laundry on the couch. That's cool. Sit down, man. Just push it over.
Dang, that's so good. What other questions do you guys have? I mean, we want to use this time. So like, what did this stir up in you? What would you like to ask? Just unmute yourself and ask it.
I threw one out. I think that there are a number of folks on here that are doing this kind of like ground up, decentralized planting that way. But then we have folks on the call that are also leading and have been in the prevailing model that are trying to implement things. So one of the questions I had, Rob, was just, what do you think, if you're part of the prevailing model, what is one step towards moving to this decentralizing, multiplying movement of missionaries that you would suggest? What's the pathway to shift the paradigm?
I know where it started for me, and I think it's a pretty good place to start in general. So when I was at Granger, we ended up being a church of like 7,000 on a weekend in a town of 46,000. And that's a big job, right? There's a lot of work running an organization that big. And what I inadvertently let happen is it really pulled me out of my own neighborhood without me really noticing it. I wasn't really discipling anyone anymore. I was kind of just like leading and managing and teaching and organizing. And I remember a particular moment where I was standing at the end of my driveway and I was looking at this guy who's mowing his lawn 2 houses down. And I was like, that dude could drop dead and I don't even know his name. Jesus wouldn't be this way if he was in my neighborhood. And God broke me, and I went inside and I told my wife, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm a phony right now. And I just I somehow let this happen. I've been in some ways asleep at the wheel, and we talked, and it's like, we're going to be, present in our neighborhood. Like, how can we start making some changes? So like what we did, couple strategic changes. One was we met with our kids and we said, let's open up our table. We want you guys to be really, more people in the neighborhood than we do. So would you start inviting your friends to come and eat? And our kids were young. They're like 7 years, and I'm like, yeah. Huh? And I'm not kidding. Our grocery bill doubled in like 3 months. Like all the kids were like coming to our house, 2 or 3 nights a week. And then like we decided, I remember it was beginning of summer, and I was like, hey, let's start like a s'mores on Friday night twice a month and invite the parents. And guess what? The parents came. So we started getting no parents. And then we just started living the bless rhythms. I actually knew the bless rhythms at the time. We started praying for these people by name, listening, engaging, eat, serve, story. And you know what? Within a matter of probably 6 months, we were getting to share the gospel. People were coming to Jesus. And suddenly people that we didn't really know, like, oh, my daughter just tried to commit suicide. Rob, can you come over right now? Can we talk? Like guy owns a painting business, ends up, he's 10 years into it and he hates painting. I don't know what to do, bro. What am I going to do? And we ended up having a whole conversation about calling, which led to a whole new career that God led him to. People who were strangers were meeting Jesus and we're doing discipleship. So what I'm trying to say, I think you start with yourself, like really make sure, am I living like a missionary? Is my table activated? Am I making disciples? And the other thing is like, get a coach. Like when I started implementing this at Granger, we started with a little cohort of like 15 or 20 people. And I had a friend who was in the Forge network. And I was like, man, would you walk with me with this group? Because I feel like you're farther along than me in some ways. And having that outside voice was really helpful. So I think the best place to start is with your own life. And if you're already activated and you're doing it personally, like in your neighborhood or your network, wherever God's called you, you know, to create, you don't have to reboot the whole system. You can kind of create a new training pathway alongside whatever you're currently doing with a small cohort of people. Like this, like set up a missionary pathway, you know, and take 10 or 15 people on that journey and then start profiling their stories as you're teaching on Sunday morning or leading meetings. Those are just a couple ideas I'd recommend to start with.
Thanks. And I really love that you kind of point out the reality that being in a prevailing model church can in some ways pull us out of orbit with people who don't know Jesus, rather than having that disciple making heartbeat, and repentance rather than organizational shifts is really the start, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah. And it's like, we didn't, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to say this. Like I was trying to do everything I could to help more people know Jesus. So like, I don't want anyone to feel like condemned because you're really busy leading whatever you're leading. But we don't, if our organization is doing it, we don't get personal credit, if you know what I mean. Like, it's like my church is giving X amount of dollars to the poor, but I don't know any poor people. Yeah. I'm not friends with any poor people. It's like, that's not okay. Like, I don't get credit because my church is doing it. Like if I'm going to walk with Jesus, I got to know my neighbors. I got to have some friends that are weird and poor and strange, because I find out, guess what? I'm weird and poor and strange. Oh, blessed are the poor in spirit. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the only, and the challenge of the prevailing model church is, you know, the platform that all of us get from that is a gift, but it also can really damage your soul. You just got to be aware of it. Like you know, like it really, you got to have good spiritual habits. You got to have a triad where you're very transparent about your weirdness, your poorness, your brokenness, you know, because the platform is not a neutral space. It'll actually wear you down.
Rob, it seemed like when you're talking about that missionary pathway, that calling, somebody discovering or understanding what their calling was kind of the key that would make them hungry for the rest of the stuff along that path. Can you talk a little bit more about how you help somebody discover that piece?
Yeah, you're so right, man. That is a great observation. That's the problem with how I used to mobilize people. It's like, hey, here are our programs and we're going to make such a difference and you can make a difference. And I want you to be a part of this and sign up as a volunteer. And it's exhausting because it's like, it's almost like I'm trying to be the Holy Spirit to motivate people, you know, to do stuff. Whereas if you help them discover their actual gifts, passions, and story, they're internally motivated. Like by the Spirit of God, by the original design, Jesus' thumbprint on their soul. So what we've created is a really simple assessment process that's built around gifts, passion, and story. So we use the analogy of GPS. If you pick up enough signals from the satellites, it can show you where you are, you know, and where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And there's a soul technology like that. And if you pick up the signal of your gifts, your passion, and your story, and you're doing that in community, because calling isn't just something you do in isolation. The church has to confirm your call. You're gonna figure out what we call your masterpiece mission. That's based off of Ephesians 2:10. It says there's a set body of good works. In the original language, it says you're to walk in this body of good works, you know, that the Lord's designed for you. And so if you guys go to findyourplacebook.com, we wrote a companion book for ordinary folks. So you take the assessment, it's free. You all can take it for free. You can give it to anybody you want to take for free. The book brings kind of illumination. It's real story driven, easy to read. And then what we do with the personal discovery team is they take the gifts, passion, story assessment. We also have them take Strength Finders, Enneagram, and DISC. And then there's actually a survey they fill out. We call it personal discovery. It's some questions. We actually based it off of the CPAC questions. If you've been through CPAC, so Stadia has been a huge help to us. They helped launch the underground. And we're actually partnering together. We have a hub launch cohort to help people launch hubs in different cities. So there's a part of the assessment is like, how is it with your soul? How is it with your most important relationships? How's your emotional maturity? By the way, emotional maturity, I'm not giving you the finger, but I just did. Emotional maturity is where most people actually get blown up. And then finances. Because we want missionary souls to be full. We want their marriages healthy. If you're upside down in debt, like, hey, your next step in mission is to meet with our financial services team and go through FPU, baby. That's missionary training if you're upside down in your finances. It's like, you're not going to be able to be a good missionary if you're swimming in debt. So let us help you. But now it's for a different reason. You know, it's not just for my personal benefit. It's like, I'm doing this because I'm on mission and I want to join Jesus, you know? So basically the personal discovery team, they fill out those assessments, they fill out that survey, we give them a report, we meet with them to help them interpret it, and then we make some suggestions based off of what's in there on kind of next steps. And it's such a cool experience. Like those debrief sessions, you're so aware that you're standing on holy ground, you know, and we get the coolest feedback. Or people, I mean, I've probably heard this a couple dozen times where people say, I've never felt so known and understood. No one's ever taken the time to help me understand the way God's wired me and where I have some huge gaping holes. And I actually recommended some meaningful, everybody gets like a personalized coaching plan. So if you guys are interested in that, like we've got like a training document that we use to train people that do the personal discovery thing. It's basically CPAC for missionaries and microchurches. But we just don't ever give anyone a red light. It's like, it's green or yellow for everybody that goes through.
Yeah, Rob,
I was just going to clarify a piece on that. Do you clarify with them who their target is? Like
that's a part of it. It's like, okay. Because the passion piece, like the gifts, you're doing natural abilities and then spiritual gifts. Passion, you're doing people, causes, and then influencing passion, which is actually Ephesians 4. It's the APES stuff. So in the people and the causes, you're trying to help them really get narrow. Like, where are you passionate? Who are you passionate about? Where are you sent to? You know?
So where can we find that document is my question. Or can you send it along and I can pass it along?
Yeah. On the backside, I can send like these PDFs and I can send a link for that.
Awesome. Okay.
Just so you know, that training guide is like, don't be overwhelmed by it. It's pretty extensive. You can just literally have someone take GPS and then meet with them and go, okay, let's talk about your top 2 gifts in your top area of passion and let's get going. So you can do like a super lightweight version of it, which is literally top 2 gifts, area of passion. Let's figure out some next steps. Or you can do what I'll send you, which is way more immersive.
Okay.
Hey, can I squeeze in a couple questions?
Please, Tim. I will say this: if anybody needs to jump off, please feel free. We're gonna send this replay link, and but yeah, please, Tim, go.
Okay, this might be a little bit cheating, but I'm gonna try to squeeze in 2 questions here. Rob, you mentioned that you're in a triad, and I'm wondering if you recommend to microchurch leaders and missionaries when they're discipling, are they in a discipling kind of rhythm or relationship that's smaller than their oikos, their household, like a triad or something else? That's one. And then secondly, any words of wisdom or experiences you've navigated, if I could kind of just to simplify, 2 different people groups, one that you're reaching and one that's already knows Jesus but is not on mission, that you're maybe are only used to the prevailing model and you're trying to invite. Like, how have you navigated, how much energy to put to that? What's your grid for assessing, hey, are you ready to come? Like, how do you listen to the Spirit when you're saying, I really like this person, but they might not be ready to join this particular form of God's work right now?
Yeah, those are great questions. So on the second one, the last church that I was serving in here in Kansas City, organized church, I was Westside Family Church and another large church. What we did there is we'd use kind of the weekend and the programs of the church as sort of the fishing pond to invite people into a disciple making relationship. And we created what we call now intentional disciple making environments. It's like a relational environment that has all the ingredients in it to actually make disciples who can make disciples. And we created something called Followers Made. It was a 6-month journey to help believers basically become actual disciple makers. We created another thing called Missionaries Made. It's a 4-month journey into blessed rhythms and gospel fluency. We had another thing called Leaders Made, 10 months on how to be a servant leader, to lead a community that way. And then Micro Church Learning Community, which is, wow, this isn't just a team that's a subset of the church. Like, this is actually a fresh expression of the church. That micro may or may not even connect to a weekend service or whatever. There's a coaching relationship. But so you're saying, how do you decide who's ready? So the way that we would invite people, let's say, into Missionaries Made, if I was starting a Missionaries Made, first of all, we train the disciple maker. Like, you need to be praying like Jesus prayed, that the Father would show you who you're supposed to invite. There's an aspect of this that is revelation from heaven. And you can't, if Jesus had to pray all night, you better pray. Like, you need some extraordinary prayer to go into your invitations. And then you need to invite them the way Jesus did. It was like it's highly invitational and highly challenging. So the way that we did that is, I would say, let's say it was you, Tim. It's like, and we'd already be friends and all that. It's like, Tim, I've been praying about something for weeks, and I'm not trying to freak you out, but God keeps giving me your name, and I want to ask you to go on a 6-month journey with me, and we're going to go deep into what it means to join Jesus on mission. And we're going to learn some new habits. It's going to be hard and different and really exciting and maybe scary. And I think we'll be different. I think we're going to be more like Jesus at the end of this. And I think we're going to see God do some amazing things through us. And I want to start meeting weekly with you. There's about 11 other guys, and God's giving me their names, and I'm having the same conversation with them. And I want you to start praying about if Jesus wants you to go on this journey with me. And here's what we're going to do. I want you to go buy the book Flesh by Hugh Halter, and we're going to meet in 2 weeks with the rest of the guys who are willing to read the book. And then I'm going to show you what the commitment is to do this thing, because it's kind of a high bar. So be praying, read that book. We'll get together in 2 weeks. So I'm trying to imitate Jesus's invitation. And if they're not willing to read the book, then I don't like shade them. I'm just like, oh, it's all right, bro. It's probably not right time. It's cool. We're still buds. Everything's great. But this gathering just for those that have read the book, And so I'll keep you posted, and I'll be launching one of these again probably in 6 months, and I'm going to check in with you then. And sometimes they're like, okay, they turn around and read the book in 2 days or something. They're like, all right, I'll be there. I'm going to do it. And then at that meeting, we basically walk through, like, here's the spiritual habits we're going to practice the next 4 months. Here's what the expectations are. Everybody in here is going to be in a triad. You just walk through what it means to kind of leave your nets and follow. And our success rate when you invite people that way is so high, and people filter themselves out because you're being led by the Spirit. And then you're actually doing a leave your nets and follow me invitation. And if you guys are interested, all of those intentional discipling environments, my side hustle is this thing called Disciples Made. And you can get a subscription, and all of that's in a web app, and you can use them. And we'll coach you on how to implement them. And that stuff is what actually launched the Kansas City Underground. Kansas City Underground got birthed out of doing that in a prevailing model church. Did I answer your questions? Was there another one I skipped? Something about
yeah, I mean, the first question was like, once for Kansas City Underground, like the network and relationships or affinity. I mean, there's different kinds of micro churches.
Oh yeah, I got
in
it.
different venues. And is there a smaller context where you're pulling a few and intentionally discipling them in a way that's not happening when you're together?
So what we say is the North Star is, we don't just need Jesus' message, we need his methods. And Jesus had 3 and 12 and 72. And they were like a Russian nesting doll. So it wasn't like I got my 3 over here and got my 12 over here and I got my, because if you build your relational world that way, you're like those old plate spinners. You're like running back and forth, trying to keep all these relationships going. And it's super exhausting. And you don't really, so our North Star is you want to see that built out kind of in the same context. So now I actually, have that in my neighborhood, but it's taken 6 years for that to build out. Right. So it's kind of sloppy in the beginning because, like when Michelle and I moved into our neighborhood, I wasn't going to have my triad in my neighborhood. Because I'm just getting to know my neighbors. So my triad was 2 other buddies that were part of Westside Family Church. And I was doing Followers Made with a bunch of guys at Westside Family Church. And then we were doing Followers Made with this group of men and women, and then microchurch learning community, while things were kind of going slowly in my network growing. And then we reached a point, a couple of years ago where it's like, wow, this is amazing, So sometimes you have to kind of surf to, getting it in another context where you're trying to build it in one. But the long term, it's like the best way to live is if you can get 3 and 12 and 72 all kind of in one context, because then you're going deep and you're going wide, and it's really, and it's one of the most countercultural embodiments of the gospel in America. Like we had new neighbors who moved in here 4 weeks ago, and within 2 days, he was like, "What is going on in this neighborhood?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "It's like a huge family. Like everybody knows each other. They're raising their kids together. Like, what is going on?" He's like, "What?" And I was, trying to be a good missionary. Don't want to go too far too fast. I was like, no, it really is like that. And it's kind of emerged over the last 5 or 6 years. And we meet for a meal on Wednesday nights, and we'd love for you to come. He's like, yeah, I'll come by, and he spun by, and he was like, this is really cool. He's like, and he knows some people at Bibles. He's like, what are you guys doing? I was like, well, after our meal, if you want, we're really fascinated with Jesus. I think he's the smartest man who ever lived. And we're, as a community in a neighborhood, we really value him and his way. And so we read the Bible. No one preaches. There's no preachers. We read the Bible and we have a conversation. We're discovering together what it means, who Jesus is. He's like, now I grew up Catholic, so I think that's cool. I'm like, that's awesome, man. He's like, I won't stay tonight, but I think it's cool that you guys are reading the Bible. He came back the next week, and so did another family. It was the first time they came when we were in Acts 2. And we went through, 36 through the end. And one of our neighbors that we've helped lead to Jesus, we got done reading it and someone else was facilitating it. And that his name is Jordan. And Jordan said, what stood out to you guys? And Michaela, she went like this, holding her Bible open to Acts chapter 2. This is us. And then the next 30 minutes, our microchurch family with these 2 new families, they retold the story of like spontaneously of like how this came to be. And at the end of that, one new family, the woman who has a lot of social anxiety, it's a big deal that she even came. She's like, I'm not even sure what this is, but I want to be a part of it from now on. I'll be here next week. And the other guy I was talking about, he's like, hey, what about if we have a party for everybody and I make smoked meats for the whole neighborhood? Can I host it at my house? Like, that'd be perfect, bro. Yeah. So it really does, like when you have the 3 and the 12 and the 72 in one context, it's like the gospel presence is so strong that like a new family moved in and in 4 weeks, they're a part of our microchurch now, because they're like, it's so, why would you not want to be a part of that?
Okay, this is really random, but as you're describing that picture, do you have folks in your microchurch in your neighborhood that then attend a church on Sunday morning?
We do actually have 2 families that do. One, they already attended before they became a part of our microchurch. And then the other one, our microchurch got going when I was still at Westside.
Right.
I never invited any of them to come. But one of our neighbors, you know, she started coming regular. And then when I left Westside, one of the other guys who was a teaching pastor there, he left around the same time and started another church here in Shawnee. And so she goes there on Sunday mornings. But if you ask her, hey, where's your church? She'd say, oh, my church is my family and my neighborhood.
Yeah.
But we're great with that. It's like, yeah, please go attend. And one of the things we haven't done yet that we're going to do actually is the collectives are, if they want to, if the elders of that collective want to do a shared worship gathering, it's like, awesome, go for it. So in the West Shawnee Collective, post-COVID, when everything's clear, we're going to start. We're going to invite all the micro churches and the micro church family members, like, hey, let's meet maybe once a month or once a quarter, and we're going to worship. And you know what I'm going to do that I haven't done in a long time? I'm going to preach. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't preached in a long time.